First, though, tonight, a deeper look at the Supreme Court plan to take up the same-sex marriage debate.
For several months now, the country has been divided. In some states, gay couples can marry. In others, like here in Texas, they cannot. We will look at the case involving the ban in Texas shortly, but first, here's Dan Shinneman with a look at what this Supreme Court decision means for all of us.
36 states now permit same-sex marriages, but courts have upheld bans in 5 others. Now, the Supreme Court will take on the issue.
Dearly beloved.
A decision that could make same-sex unions the law of the land. The justices agreed to resolve 2 questions. Does the Constitution require states to grant marriage licenses to same-sex couples? And must states recognize same-sex marriages legally performed elsewhere?
There aren't that many uncharted areas of the Constitution when it comes to just the core question of what's discrimination, what's fairness, what's equality in the country, and how much are we going to rely on tradition.
The court will hear arguments on 4 cases. One, a challenge to Michigan's ban, brought by April DeBoer and Jane Rouse.
We saw something that was wrong and we decided we needed to make it right.
Together for 8 years, each has adopted children. But they want to be married, so both can have legal parental rights and protections for all the children.
It's just so incredibly important that the Supreme Court decide this issue, that it be decided once and for all, and that it apply to all 50 states of the Union.
For supporters of state bans, the issue is who decides.
Is it a handful of federal judges that get to decide this important policy question of marriage, or is it the American people at the ballot box and through our democratic institutions?
The court will hear arguments in April, with the decision expected in June. Dan Shinneman, NBC News.
Now, the Supreme Court case specifically involves 4 states, not including Texas, and that's because the challenge to the Texas ban is still in the federal appeals process. KXAN's David Scott spoke to one of the women challenging the Texas law to get her perspective on the Supreme Court's decision.
Nicole DeMentman and Cleopatra De Leon were married in Massachusetts in 2009. It remains unrecognized in Texas. They now have a young son, another child on the way, and they both hold down full-time jobs. Their legal struggle has been a long one, but they say worth it.
Well, absolutely. The momentum has been extraordinary for marriage equality nationwide, and it's been amazing to be a part of it.
They are fighting a decade-old state amendment voters approved 3-1, banning same-sex marriage. Last week, their case continued on before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. Nicole expects to win it, and soon.
We fully anticipate that the Fifth Circuit will issue a ruling before the Supreme Court does and issue one in favor of marriage equality.
She also believes the U.S. Supreme Court will decide to uphold same-sex marriage, and that will be the day this will all be behind them.
For my wife and I, having our marriage recognized will mean that we no longer have to look over our shoulder every time we have a child or anytime anything major happens in our lives, somebody gets sick. It also just means that, our children get to grow up in a world where they don't feel like they're less than.
David Scott, KXAN News.
Now, Nicole and Cleopatra married 6 years ago, but the state has not recognized that union. They vow to fight as long as it takes, and no matter how their case goes, the U.S. Supreme Court could settle the issue in one nationwide decision expected in June. Now, attitudes towards gay marriage have changed over the years. As David Scott mentioned, Texas's marriage amendment passed in 2005 with 75% voter support. But in the October 2014 poll by our partners, the Texas Tribune and UT, only 47% of Texans said gays and lesbians should not have the right to marry. 42% say they should, and 11% remained undecided.
And for more perspective now, this is what the United States map looks like today. Same-sex couples are allowed to marry in 36 states and in the District of Columbia. The other 14 states, including Texas, have constitutional bans on same-sex marriage. But it wasn't long ago when the map looked very different, as you see. Last year, several federal appeals courts ruled same-sex couples can marry, and the Supreme Court let those rulings stand. Before that, only about a dozen states allowed same-sex marriage.